Hello everybody! Today we're going to talk about session 12, so let's get started. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. I communicate now. Questioner. I got a call from Henry Puharich this afternoon. He'll be here next month. I want to ask you if it's possible for him to join in our circle and ask questions, and also if Mikkel Brenovic, who's also known as George Hunt Williamson, happens to come here, would it be all right for him to be in the circle? I am Ra. These entities at present are not properly attuned for the particular work due to vibrational distortions, which in turn are due to a recent lack of time-space, which you call busyness. It would be requested that the entities spend a brief time-space in each diurnal cycle of your planet in contemplation. At a future time-space in your continuum, you are requested to ask again. This group is highly balanced to this instrument's vibratory distortions due to, firstly, contact with the instrument on a day-to-day basis. Secondly, due to contact with the instrument through meditation periods. Thirdly, through a personal mind-body-spirit complex distortion towards contemplation, which in sum causes this group to be effective. So, here we have Don asking if two of his buddies can join the channeling circle, and Ra says no. They are too busy, too much busyness. So, going back on what we were talking about in session 11, about the need to indulge in leisure, to have time to be contemplative, to not be so obsessed with productivity and doing and manifesting, and instead seeking to do what Ra later calls reverse the analytical process. Those who are spending too much time engaged with the analytical process aren't of the proper vibration to join this circle that calls upon Ra. Ra says, though, that if they really want to, they can try to reorient themselves towards this, spending time in each diurnal cycle of your planet in contemplation. Basically, if they were to be able to meditate every day for a specific period of time, not a specific period of time, but a significant period of time, then Dawn can ask again in the future if they'd be able to join, and Ra would then give that assessment later in the future. But right now, they are not of the proper vibration. Ra says this is specifically Carla's vibration. Carla needs to feel comfortable. And, Carla actually really never liked Andrea Puharich. She said it a few times. She says it pretty much here in the Book 5 info, because this question was removed from the original printing of the books. She saw Andrea as somebody who took advantage of people. In particular, she saw him take advantage of Dawn, and he just kind of was so busy doing his own thing all of the time and seeking monetary support from people that he just kind of was a user in that way. He was just kind of preoccupied with getting his own thing done and getting from other people what he needed from those people to do his thing. And Dawn was just very much supportive of Andrea. Dawn didn't feel this way about him. Dawn saw him as a very close friend and wanted to support him, but Carla saw a slightly different side of Andrea, so they weren't really harmonized. And so I think that's one big reason why Ra says, too, that the group is highly balanced to this instrument's vibratory distortions. And that's because they meditate together, they are together every day, and because everyone in the group of Dawn, Carla, and Jim had their own meditation practice, would spend time in contemplation, weren't obsessed with busyness and engaging with the analytical mind. So Ross says maybe in the future, but not right now. And Andrea actually never does come to a Raw session. Spoiler alert. He never shows up. He was only peripherally interested in what Dawn was doing. And I think that's kind of interesting because I actually watched a video recently that somebody shared that they were trying to debunk the Raw material and say that it was CIA influenced because Andrea Puharich was CIA. And it's funny because if you know all of the details of the Raw material, Dawn had invited Andrea to come and be a part of the Raw sessions, but it wasn't important enough to him. So if he was some sort of CIA influence on the Raw material, I think he would have at least shown up for a session or two, maybe meditated for a month and then shown up for a session or two. I don't know, but I just thought that was kind of a funny to debunk the debunker. But so yeah, that was question 1. 12.2, Dawn says, thank you. Continuing with the previous session, you mentioned that the Orion Crusaders came here in chariots. Could you describe a chariot? I am Ra. The term chariot is a term used in warfare among your peoples. That is its significance. The shape of the Orion craft is one of the following. Firstly, the elongated ovoid shape, which is of a darker nature than silver, but which has a metallic appearance if seen in the light. In the absence of light, it appears to be red or fiery in some manner. Other craft include disc-shaped objects of a small nature, approximately 12 feet in your measurement in diameter. The box-like shape, approximately 40 feet to a side in your measurement. Other craft can take on a desired shape through the use of thought control mechanisms. There are various civilization complexes which work within this group. Some are more able to use intelligent infinity than others. The information is very seldom shared. Therefore, the chariots vary greatly in shape and appearance. So here we have Dawn again, curious about UFOs, and Ross says that they use the term chariot to refer to Orion UFOs because they are vehicles of warfare. And then Ra does go on to describe the way that they look, because that is what Dawn really wanted to know. And they say that some can take on a desired shape through the use of thought control mechanisms, which aligns with fifth density capabilities, being able to form matter into whatever shape, form that you desire. Those would be the ones who are more able to use intelligent infinity than others. But then Ra also explains that the Orion group, though termed as a group, is not really a cohesive group. They are a group in that they are service-to-self beings. They are the higher density service-to-self beings of 4th, 5th, and early 6th density, but they don't actually share their knowledge with each other very often, unlike positive entities, which freely share their knowledge with other positive entities. So there is a wide variety of how the Orion chariots, UFOs, appear physically in appearance. And that is because some are just formed in a very specific way, and also because 5th density and beyond beings can form matter in whatever way they want it to look. So there is a variance in how these Orion chariots appear. So 12.3, questioner, is there any effort by the Confederation to stop the Orion chariots from arriving here? I am Ra. Every effort is made to quarantine this planet. However, the network of guardians, much like any other pattern of patrols on whatever level, does not hinder each and every entity from penetrating quarantine. For if request is made in light love, the law of one will be met with acquiescence. If the request is not made, due to the slipping through the net, then there is penetration of this net. So here Ra is saying that the guardians work really hard to protect the planet. If the request is made in light love, then the law of one will be met with acquiescence. I'm assuming this means if the beings who are trying to come through the net have already been approved by the Council of Saturn, because they're the ones who approve those who are allowed to come through. But otherwise, there is some slipping through the net because the guardians aren't able to completely quarantine the planet 100%. There is some slipping through the net. And we talk a little bit more about this here going through the rest of the session. Dawn asks in 12.4, who makes this request? I am Ra. Your query is unclear. Please restate. Questioner, I didn't quite understand. How does the Confederation stop the Orion chariot from coming through the quarantine? What actions do... And Dawn trails off. I am Ra. There is contact at the level of light form or light body being, depending upon the vibratory level of the guardian. These guardians sweep reaches of your Earth's energy fields, attempting to be aware of any entities approaching. An entity which is approaching is hailed in the name of the One Creator. Any entity thus hailed is bathed in love light and will of free will obey the quarantine due to the power of the law of one. So I'm just going to read the next question because Don asks for an explanation of that. Don says, what would happen to the entity if he did not obey the quarantine after being hailed? I am Ra. To not obey quarantine after being hailed on the level of which we speak would be equivalent to your not stopping upon walking into a solid brick wall. So essentially, if they are able to catch the beings before they slip through a hole or a window in the quarantine, then there's just absolutely no way that they can get through the quarantine. They're just unable to infringe upon our free will that way because the quarantine was set up to protect our free will. And so if they're coming to infringe, they're just not allowed to do that unless they find a way to infringe upon the quarantine itself. So in 12.7, Don asks, what would happen to the entity then if he did this? What had happened to his chariot? I am Ra. The Creator is one being. The vibratory level of those able to reach the quarantine boundaries is such that upon seeing the love light net, it is impossible to break this law. Therefore, nothing happens. No attempt is made. There is no confrontation. The only beings who are able to penetrate the quarantine are those who discover windows or distortions in the space-time continua surrounding your planet's energy fields. Through these windows they come. These windows are rare and unpredictable. So, what makes these windows? I don't know. They're rare and unpredictable. I would assume some of the things that make these windows are a really strong calling for negative information or negative entities. Maybe even rituals performed by polarized negative entities to open windows to allow negative beings to come through with some sort of prior communication that this would be happening, and then therefore they're able to slip through without being hailed and without being stopped because their density beings have opened that window for them. These are the things that I assume create the windows, and maybe there are just totally random windows that happen. I think at some point later, Rod does say that there is like a balancing mechanism in the quarantine net where they can't just allow positive beings to come through because that would also infringe upon our free will if they only let positive beings come through. So there has to be some way for negative beings to break through the quarantine, sometimes in a proportionate amount to the amount of times that positive beings come through. So Don asks in 12.8, does this account for what we call the UFO flaps, where a large number of UFOs show up like in 1973? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner. Well, then, are most of the UFOs which are seen in our skies from the Orion group? I am Ra. Many of those seen in your skies are of the Orion group. They send out messages. Some are received by those who are oriented towards service to others. These messages then are altered to be acceptable to those entities while warning of difficulties ahead. This is the most that self-serving entities can do when faced with those whose wish is to serve others. The contacts which the group finds most helpful to their cause are those contacts made with entities whose orientation is towards service to self. There are many thought-form entities in your skies which are of a positive nature and are the projections of the Confederation. Other sightings are due to the inadvertent visualization by your people's optical mechanisms of your own government's weaponry. So this is kind of a repeat from an answer that Don and Ra exchanged earlier. Many of the UFOs in the sky are Orion. They break through the quarantine. This causes UFO flaps, where a bunch of UFOs are sighted in a short period of time. Other sightings are due to the inadvertent visualization by your people's optical mechanisms of your own government's weaponry, so us seeing secret government technology that we translate as an unidentified flying object. And then, of course, there are thought form entities, which are projections of the Confederation. So we have those three types. Ross says that when the Orion group does break through, they send out messages, and some of those messages are received by service to others beings, and really all they can do is kind of give a faux positive message, but then also warn of events that are scary and difficult in our future. Whether or not these events are actually going to come to pass, they rarely do. It's my belief that I don't really like engaging in those types of channelings that are kind of positive, but then talk about future doom and hardship, because if they are talking about a potential event that's happening, like nothing's set in stone. It's just a possibility probability vortex. So the more that they can get people to feed into that possibility probability vortex, the more that possibility probability vortex widens. So I really think most of the time they're just completely making it up, though. They're just probably reading the mind of whoever is receiving the message and finding whatever is going to disturb them the most, whether it's an earthquake in California or a volcanic eruption or whatever, a world war, these kinds of things that are just whatever is going to most shock that entity and the entities who are going to listen to that message. But that's all they can do if they contact someone who's distorted towards service to others, is scare them, essentially. They really are looking for service to self entities so that they can communicate their service to self philosophy to incarnated third density beings who can then go forward and promulgate that and use their teachings to enslave others. That's their ultimate goal when they break through the quarantine. So, 1210, which group was it that contacted Henry Puharich in Israel right around 1972? I am Ra. We must refrain from answering this query due to the probability that the one you call Henry will read this answer. This would cause distortions in his future. It is necessary that each being use free and complete discernment from within the all-self, which is at the heart of the mind-body-spirit complex. So I'm, not super familiar with Andrea Puharich's work, but doing just a tiny little bit of research for this episode, I did find out that it was in 1971 that Puharich met Uri Geller. We already talked about that because Dawn had already asked about the Uri book. And Uri was from Israel, and while he was studying Uri, researching with Uri, they had a contact. Here, I'll just read the paragraph about this from Andrea Puharich's Wikipedia. In his biography of Geller, Uri, a Journal of the Mystery of Uri Geller, from 1974, Puharich claimed that with Geller, he had communicated with super-intelligent computers from outer space. According to Puharich, the computers sent messages to warn humanity that a disaster is likely to occur if humans do not change their ways. Puharich claimed that extraterrestrial beings had communicated to him that Geller was the chosen savior of humanity and had been given the ability to contact flying saucers and perform paranormal phenomena such as psychokinesis, spoonbending, telepathy, and teleportation. He also claimed to have experienced poltergeist phenomena with Geller. So, Andrea had a lot of experiences with Uri Geller. It sounds like they channeled some beings. It sounds like Dawn's alarm bells were going off. He was seeing some red flags based on what Ra was saying, and that's why he asked about this contact that Andrea had in Israel in 1972, based on the warnings of doom and disaster alongside the message that Uri was a chosen one. Sounds a little negative to me, potentially, and it's interesting because then here in this next question, Dawn asks about one of his contacts, and Ra affirms that it was Confederation. So I think that's all you need to know, but I think that Ra not confirming this for Andrea at least prevents breaking Andrea's free will about who may have contacted them back during this time. So in 1211, Dawn asks, does that also apply to answering who was contacting the group that I originally was in 1962? I am Ra. This query may be answered. The group contacted was the Confederation. So really, I think a lot of the raw material for me is learning how to discern other channeled information. And so much of it is just detuned and really mixed bag. And so it's really hard to find channeling groups that are able to maintain a purity of their tuning. And Dawn's still going to ask more questions about this here even in this session. So in 1212, Dawn asks, did they have any of their craft in our area at that time? I am Ra. There was no craft. There was a thought form. So there are like old Hatan channelings and stuff where they talk about having a ship in our skies above us and stuff like that. And I'm assuming that was part of the communications that Dawn was receiving in 1962 even, was a reference to their spaceship, because this is what really was driving Dawn to seek these communications, was the spaceships. So here's Ra affirming, though, that the Confederation doesn't have craft in our sky, necessarily actual physical craft, just thought forms, just projections of what their craft might look like, or even more likely, what we expect their craft to look like. So, in 1213, Dawn asks, you mentioned the Crusaders. When they do get through the net, give both technical and non-technical information. We know what you mean by technical information, but what type of non-technical information do they give to those they contact? Am I right in assuming that this is all done by telepathic communication? I am Ra. This is correct. Through telepathy, the philosophy of the law of one with the distortion of service to self is promulgated. In advanced groups, there are rituals and exercises given, and these have been written down, just as the service to others-oriented entities have written down the promulgated philosophy of their teachers. The philosophy concerns the service of manipulating others, that they may experience service towards the other self, thus, through this experience, becoming able to appreciate service to self. These entities, thus, would become oriented towards service to self, and in turn manipulate yet others, so that they in turn might experience the service towards the other self. So, firstly, with Dawn's question here, he's asking that this is all done, am I right in assuming this is all done by telepathic communication? This is what actually drove Dawn to channeling, because after studying UFOs for so long and UFO contactee experiences, he realized that all of the communication was telepathic. Everyone who told their stories of having been contacted by beings in UFOs, the communication was done to them telepathically, done with them telepathically. So Ra's affirming, yes, telepathy is the means of disseminating this information, and the non-technical information is really about how to enslave others. Manipulating people so that they are serving you, and so that then they may learn then how to serve themselves in turn as well, and then go forward to manipulate other beings into serving them. So that's the non-technological information that is given, is how to enslave other beings, and then hopefully inspire them to seek service to self. So in 12.14, Dawn asks, would this be the origin of what we call black magic? I am Ra. This is correct in one sense, incorrect in another. The Orion group has aided the so-called negatively oriented among your mind-body-spirit complexes. These same entities would be concerning themselves with service to self in any case, and there are many upon your so-called inner planes which are negatively oriented and thus able as inner teachers or guides and so-called possessors of certain souls who seek this distortion of service to self. So I believe here essentially what Ra is saying as far as black magic goes, that I think Ra's seeing black magic as invocation, doing rituals to invoke negative entities in our inner planes who are there to possess or just offer other guidance and teachings along the path of service to self. But then it's not black magic when it's just Orion entities who have broken through the quarantine and happen to find someone who might be receptive to their information and start transmitting information to them. They're just going to do that no matter what. They're going to go and look and call themselves to other people and try to disseminate their teachings to get more people enslaved to them. But that black magic then again is the rituals, is the specific calling and invocation of these entities to come and offer their services, quote unquote. So 12.15, Dawn asks, is it possible for an entity here on Earth to be so confused as to call both the Confederation and the Orion group in an alternating way, one, then the other, and then back to the first? A little bit of that is inaudible, so I just assumed that that's what Dawn was saying there. Ra responds, I am Ra. It is entirely possible for the untuned channel, as you call that service, to receive both positive and negative communications. If the entity at the base of its confusion is oriented towards service to others, the entity will begin to receive messages of doom. If the entity at the base of the complex of beingness is oriented towards service to self, the Crusaders, who in this case do not find it necessary to lie, will simply begin to give the philosophy they are here to give. Many of your so-called contacts among your people have been confused and self-destructive because the channels were oriented towards service to others, but, in the desire for proof, were open to the lying information of the Crusaders, who then were able to neutralize the effectiveness of the channel. So, I think this is a really big one. Like I said, so much of what Ra teaches is how to discern other channeled information and how properly tuned the instrument receiving the information is. So I would go out on a limb and say that most channelers don't really understand the concept of tuning and how to make sure that they have a purity in how they are calling for information, because so many, as Ross says, many of your so-called contacts have been confused and self-destructive because they wanted proof. And a date of a future catastrophe is a kind of proof. Like, oh, they gave us something tangible, and when the date comes and passes, then we'll know that they were telling the truth. They're giving us this proof. Later, Ra talks about how this is how the fake Yahweh was able to contact Moses. Moses was a very service to others being. However, his peoples really wanted proof. And so the negative beings came and lit a bush on fire and did all sorts of other stuff, fantastical things, to prove their existence to this group of people. And then therefore were able to decree laws upon these people about behavior and really restrict them in a lot of ways. So, I think that was, personally, I believe it's one of Carla's greatest contributions to channeling as an art form, is this concept of challenging a contact, which people, even if they've learned from Carla, they still really don't understand fully what that means. A lot of people think if you just say Jesus, that negative beings can't talk to you anymore, and that's not really the case. It really is more about tuning yourself and what you deeply, truly, deeply want for yourself, and making sure that the people you surround yourself with in that group are also tuned in the same direction of wanting to serve others more than wanting proof and more than wanting specific information. Because Ra also says this later, that it's not the specificity of the information that draws negative influences, it's the importance placed upon that specificity. So when a being is like, oh, there's going to be a disaster at this place in this time, that carries with it a gravity, because then you think, oh, well, we can warn people who are in this area and hopefully save lives, and that way they aren't just totally upended by this catastrophe that's coming. And so it's really easy for our third density minds to become fixated on specific things that we think are just so important. Like another example would be politics. Like if you're really just so gripped by what's happening politically, and you have an opportunity to channel or ask a question of a channel, and that's really it just feels so important, then a negative being will come in and tell you what you want to hear, essentially. And that's going to make you feel good, and that's going to validate this contact for you, right? And so that's essentially a lot of what negative beings do, is they look for these ins, these little cracks where they can come in and tell you what you want to hear, even if it's a lie, even if it's not based in reality whatsoever. And then once they gain your trust, then they can start telling you whatever they want too, and be more subtle with negative information, or just things that will distract positive beings or continue to detune positive beings. So I know a lot of people like to read just any and all channelings. They like to discern for themselves what's going on, and I think that's great. I just really think, just to pay close attention to the things that are specific, the things that are talking about specific events, specific people, and especially predictions of future events that are going to happen that are catastrophic. I think these are all red flags that there may be other insidious portions in what is being channeled, even if it sounds really good on the surface. Sometimes things can just get a little twisted to the point where you can go off on a whole different path because you're putting so much weight into this one channeling that wasn't properly tuned. But again, here Dawn is figuring this out a lot more and realizing that, because Dawn at this point has read so much channeled information. And so he's sort of figuring out now what's the sign of an Orion contact and what are the signs of a Confederation contact. And I think that's really valuable. If you like channeling, I think it's really valuable to learn that stuff. So in 1216, Dawn asks, are most of these Crusaders fourth density? I am Ra. There is a majority of fourth density that is correct. 12.17, Dawn asks, does an individual in the fourth density normally appear, or are they normally invisible to us? I am Ra. The use of the word normal is one which befuddles the meaning of the question. Let us rephrase for clarity. The fourth density is, by choice, not visible to third density. It is possible for fourth density to be visible. However, it is not the choice of the fourth density entity to be visible due to the necessity for concentration upon a rather difficult vibrational complex, which is the third density that you experience. So here again, I think Dawn is trying to work out his own experience, his own memories of people who have had contact with who he's now thinking might be negative entities of fourth density, and correlating that with people who saw the beings who contacted them. And in some of the stories, they don't. They just get telepathic contact and things happen. But fourth density can be visible to us. They just by default are not visible to us. And they very rarely try because it's very difficult to do so. And so in 12.18, Dawn asks, are there any Confederation or Orion individuals living on Earth visible to us and important in our society at this time, walking among us? I am Ra. There are no entities of either group walking among you at this time. However, the Crusaders of Orion use two types of entities to do their bidding, shall we say. The first type is a thought form, the second, a kind of robot. So here Ra is saying that there aren't any higher density beings walking among you at this time, because Orion and Confederation are really harvestable fourth density and beyond, able to have a social memory complex, essentially, to be a part of the Confederation or the Orion group. But the Orion group does use two types of entities that they create to look like humans that aren't really humans. One is a thought form, the second is a kind of robot. So Dawn's going to ask a few more questions. Could you describe the robot? Dawn asks. And I am Ra. The robot may look like any other being. It is a construct. So Dawn asks, is the robot what is normally called Men in Black? And Ra says this is incorrect. And Dawn asks, who are the Men in Black? I am Ra. The Men in Black are a thought form type of entity which have some beingness to their makeup. They have certain physical characteristics given to them. However, their true vibrational nature is without third density vibrational characteristics, and therefore they are able to materialize and dematerialize when necessary. So, I don't really know much about the Men in Black and the lore that existed for the Men in Black, especially, before the movie came out. The movie came out when I was like 10 or something. So that's the Men in Black in my consciousness. But here Ra is affirming that it is a phenomenon that is a thought form in nature. That then here in the next question, Dawn asks, are all of these Men in Black then used by the Orion Crusaders? I am Ra. This is correct. So they are one of the thought form constructs that Orion entities use to do whatever they want to do, mostly control and enslave people is their goal. So in 12.23, Dawn asks, if one were to visit me and I grabbed him and locked him in a closet, could I keep him or would he disappear? I am Ra. It depends upon which type of entity you grab. You are perhaps able to perceive a construct. The construct might be kept for a brief period, although these constructs also have an ability to disappear. The programming on these constructs, however, makes it more difficult to remotely control them. You would not be able to grapple with a thought form entity of the Men in Black, as you call it, type. So here Dawn is trying to figure out how physical these beings are. Ra says that they can materialize and dematerialize. So Dawn's asking, would I be able to, grapple with one? And Ra says, depending upon how physical their being is. They're not able to be controlled remotely very well. So if you started fighting with one, it wouldn't be super easy for the Orion who have created this construct to just instantly dematerialize them in the moment that you begin grappling with them. They would have to, I'm assuming, follow through with their programming in a way that they're expected to do so. Whereas, if you were to lock one in a closet, that might not be anticipated in their programming. But that there are thought-forward Men in Blacks that are not physical at all, you would not be able to grapple with those Men in Black. So 12.24, Dawn asks, would this be against the law of one, and I would be making a mistake by grabbing these entities? I am Ra. There are no mistakes under the law of one. 12.25, Dawn pushes and asks, what I'm saying is, would I be polarizing more towards self-service or towards service for others when I did this act of locking up the thought form or construct? I am Ra. You may consider that question for yourself. We interpret the law of one, but not to the extent of advice. So this is an interesting question, and Dawn and Ra explore this idea more later. But ultimately, Ra can't tell you what your motivations would be in the moment if you were to try to lock up a Men in Black. If you were doing it because you were afraid of what that Men in Black might do to you, and so you then dominate the Men in Black and lock him up and hold him prisoner, then that would be more likely to be service to self. But if you were genuinely trying to protect other people, you were trying to lock up this construct to maybe learn more about it so that we can be more impervious to the effects of these programmed constructs and whatever they're trying to do to us. If your motivations were sincerely about other people, then you could be doing something service to others. Ra does go on later at another point to say that the desire to protect the loved other self is a desire that persists through fourth density. So acting in a defensive manner isn't necessarily service to self if you're defending other beings from harm. Even if there is some violence involved, if you're trying to protect them from worse harm or worse violence, that can still be an act of compassion and not an act of control. But here Ra's saying, you're going to have to figure this one out yourself, because lots of actions can be taken that could go either way depending on your own internal thought complex about what's going on and why you're doing it. Here Dawn asks in 12.26, well, you spoke of the wanderers. Who are wanderers? Where do they come from? I am Ra. Imagine, if you will, the sands of your shores. As countless as the grains of sand are the sources of intelligent infinity. When a social memory complex has achieved its complete understanding of its desire, it may conclude that its desire is service to others with the distortion towards reaching their hand, figuratively, to any entities who call for aid. These entities, whom you may call the brothers and sisters of sorrow, move towards this calling of sorrow. These entities are from all reaches of the infinite creation and are bound together by the desire to serve in this distortion. So this is a fairly poetic answer about who wanderers are and where they come from. They can come from anywhere. They can be anyone. As countless as the grains of sand are the sources of intelligent infinity. When a social memory complex decides that it wants to serve by actively reaching back towards those who are confused and third density and calling for help, then maybe they take on the experience of becoming wanderers. Obviously, this refers to Ra. They have wanderers, and Ra also says that they call themselves the brothers and sisters of sorrow because they move towards this sorrow and they want to help this sorrow. And so we will explore this concept more as we go on. Dawn will ask more about it, and Ra will talk more about the brothers and sisters of sorrow. But in 12.27, Dawn asks, how many of them are incarnate on Earth right now? I am Ra. The number is approximate due to a heavy influx of those birthed at this time due to an intensive need to lighten the planetary vibration and thus aid in harvest. The number approaches 65 million. So back in 1980, the population was 4.5 billion, about half of what we are right now. So I wonder how that has scaled here. For sure, Ra has said that a lot of entities being born now, too, are also early fourth density entities. They are not technically wanderers, those who are starting their fourth density experience here at the beginning of our fourth density. That's not wanderers, that's beings who are just incarnating at the proper vibrational locus for their evolution. But here in this next question, Dawn asks, are most of these from fourth density? What density do they come from? I am Ra. Few there are of fourth density. The largest number of wanderers, as you call them, are of the sixth density. The desire to serve must be distorted towards a great deal of purity of mind and what you may call foolhardiness or bravery, depending upon your distortion complex judgment. The challenge/danger of the wanderer is that it will forget its mission, become karmically involved, and thus be swept into the maelstrom from which it had incarnated to aid the destruction. So here Russ says that most wanderers are sixth density. Some come from fourth density. There might be a handful of fifth density wanderers. However, since fifth density is the density of wisdom, learning wisdom isn't really conducive to being incarnated with a veil. The veil is meant to confuse us, to make us foolish, and in the fifth density, accumulating wisdom is their hyper focus. It isn't even really about service. It's about accumulating and understanding wisdom. So Ra obviously has wanderers on our planet. They're pretty late sixth density. The desire to serve must be distorted towards a great deal of purity of mind and what you may call foolhardiness or bravery. So towards the end of sixth density, there's a hyper focus, a purity of intention, a purity of desire, but then also an aspect of foolhardiness or bravery because you're taking a risk when you incarnate as a wanderer. When you become veiled, you might then become karmically involved. This sentence can be taken in different ways. It's sort of hard to understand. The challenge/danger of the wanderer is that it will forget its mission, become karmically involved, and thus be swept into the maelstrom from which it had incarnated to aid the destruction. And even here on lawofone.info, it says Ra presumably meant avert or lessen here. But I think maybe what they're saying is that once you become karmically involved, then you're aiding the destruction. If we're going to take Ra for what they said here, I think that might be what they're saying, is that you might forget what you've come to do, which is to help, and instead you might be aiding in the destruction of the potentials for harvest. So, in 12.29, Dawn asks, what could one of these entities do to become karmically involved? Could you give us an example? I am Ra, an entity which acts in a consciously unloving manner in action with other beings can become karmically involved. So really what Ra is saying here is that if you are aware that you're making a service to self choice that involves other people being affected by this choice, that's how you become karmically involved. So I think most of us have that experience at one time or another, and thus it's such a huge risk coming here to Earth. I'm sure there are some beings who have never once acted in an unloving manner towards another person. I can honestly say that my experiences in doing that are very few and far between. I have very formative memories of being a child. I have a memory of manipulating my grandmother into buying me something, because that was something that my little sister would do all the time. She was very good at manipulating people into getting her way. So I was bored at a craft fair. We were at a craft fair, and I decided that I was just going to fixate on just a random item and whine and complain until I got that item. And it took such little effort to manipulate my grandmother into buying this thing that I didn't even want. I pretty much gave it up right then and there, the idea of manipulating other people to give me what I want, because it didn't feel good. It felt really bad. So that was just something I really didn't want to do. And I just have like a couple other formative memories like that. where I decided very early on that that's not how I wanted to behave. Part of my learning was my family, not just my sister, but my parents were both difficult people as well. And so I learned really early on how I didn't want to be, who I didn't want to be, and what behaviors caused more problems in other people. And they were in such acute states of distress so much of the time that I really tried to avoid any behaviors that would trigger them or upset them even more and make them spiral into a worse frame of mind than they were already in. So again, I'm not saying that I'm perfect or that I never again ever manipulated anyone. I mean, I really probably very, very few times have consciously said, I'm going to do this to get this person to do that. It's just something I never really wanted to do. It's something that, like I said, I witnessed other people doing and I tried it and it didn't fit into what I wanted to be. So, but we all make critical decisions that put ourselves above other people, that take advantage of situations where we can gain something by putting somebody else down, just by our jobs and having to work, and the society we live in sets us up for these situations, and they're so easy to fall into. So I'm not saying that I've never acted in a consciously unloving manner towards anyone else. I'm sure, but I am saying that I'm sure there are people who have avoided that distortion, have had a lot more of a harmonious life and upbringing intentionally by their choosing of where they were incarnated and what kind of families they were incarnated into, and were able to maintain that level of purity and just be really pure beacons of light for other people and not getting karmically involved. But I'm just saying, I think most of us have gotten karmically involved one way or another at times in our past, and probably maybe even times in our future. But it's good to have discernment about our actions. And that's the thing too about the law of responsibility. Once we know better, once we can recognize that we are potentially behaving in a consciously unloving manner, we have the responsibility to not make that choice, to not take that action that involves other people and putting ourselves above them. And that's what polarizing is. That's what polarity is not doing those things, avoiding them, even if it's set up so perfectly for us to do without a second thought. If we know it's wrong, we shouldn't do it. And if we do it anyway, then we're accumulating karma. So in 1230, Dawn asks, I just had a thought. Do any of these wanderers have physical ailments in this Earth situation? I am Ra. Due to the extreme variance between the vibratory distortions of third density and those of the more dense densities, if you will, wanderers have, as a general rule, some form of handicap, difficulty, or feeling of alienation which is severe. The most common of these difficulties are alienation, the reaction against the planetary vibration by personality disorders, as you would call them, and body complex ailments indicating difficulty in adjustment to the planetary vibrations, such as allergies, as you would call them. So, I definitely felt alienated as a child. I felt like nobody liked me, nobody wanted to be around me, and I mean, I still have that feeling that, like, my parents never wanted me, that I was a burden on their existence, that they would have loved to undo my existence. And, I used to have a lot more allergies, and I am much more careful about what I eat now so that I'm not consuming things that cause distortions in my body. Later, Ra will talk about all of the allergies that Carla has. Carla has a lot of allergies to food, and a lot of those are contributing to her ill health. And I think that is a really common one, as Ra's saying. The food allergies, eating food that carries with it the heavy vibrations of third density. And then there's the reaction against the planetary vibration by personality disorders, as you would call them. And so I don't even know how to necessarily comment on that, but maybe even specifically they're talking about things like schizophrenia and psychosis. But that's a pretty wide label, I think, personality disorders. But in short, wanderers do have difficulty a lot of the time. Here Ross says, as a general rule, some form of handicap, difficulty, or feeling of alienation, which is severe. So these are kind of the hallmarks of being a wanderer. It's part of the reason why it requires bravery and foolhardiness to be a wanderer, because it is very rare that you wander and incarnate as a human and then maintain a distortion-free mind-body-spirit complex. That's just incredibly hard to do. And I think that's probably partly by design, because I think a lot of the times when wanderers come here, it's for specific lessons that we want to learn, specific ways of balancing compassion and wisdom that are imbalanced at a very fine-tuned level. So we take on these distortions and difficulties to learn more about ourselves and to find a way at some point eventually in our incarnation to balance these distortions and find that balance of love and wisdom through these disorders. So in 12.31, Dawn asks, is there a best way for these entities to heal themselves of their physical ailments? I am Ra. This will be the last complete question of this time space. The healing distortion is effected through realization of the intelligent infinity resting within. This is blocked in some way in those who are not perfectly balanced in bodily complexes. The blockage varies from entity to entity. It requires the conscious awareness of the spiritual nature of reality, if you will, and the corresponding pourings of this reality into the individual mind-body-spirit complex for healing to take place. We will use this instrument as an example. The portions of its ailment, as you call this distortion complex, that can be perfected in balance are due primarily to a blockage of the indigo ray or pineal energy center. This center receives the intelligent energy from all sources lawful within the one creation, that is, lawful in this third density distortion or illusion. If there is no blockage, these energies pour or stream down into the mind-body-spirit complex, perfecting moment by moment the individual's body complex. This instrument also experiences some distortion of the green ray energy center, which you may call the heart center. It is overly open due to an intensive desire distortion on the part of this mind-body-spirit complex towards service to others, or as you may call it, universal love. This entity, therefore, spends itself without regard to its reserves of mind-body-spirit complex distortion in regard to what you call strength or energy. This distortion is primarily due to the blockage of the indigo ray. As we have said before, the misapprehension distortion of the instrument responsible for this blockage is the basic orientation towards a belief in unworthiness. The unworthiness distortion blocks the free flow of intelligent energy. The seventh, or violet ray, is unimpaired, this being not only an energy receptor but a sum total of the vibratory level of the individual. The other energy centers are also quite clear. The solution to healing in this case is action that puts into practice the peaceful understanding in humility distortion that the entity is one with the Creator, therefore perfected and not separate. In each case of what you would call ill health, one or more of these energy centers is blocked. The intelligence of the mind-body-spirit complex needs then to be alerted either by the self as healer or by the catalyst of another healer, as we have said before. Is there a short question before we close this session? So this is quite a big one. Dawn is definitely asking about Carla, and then Ra uses Carla as an example, but the only reason really that they use Carla as an example is because they're talking very generally, and also because her distortions are very common, especially among wanderers. So essentially, what Ra's saying here is that any distortions of ill health are a symptom of a blockage of the indigo ray. And the indigo ray can be blocked for a lot of reasons. In Carla, it's essentially her feeling of unworthiness, and then this then feeds back into her open heart, where she then serves without any regard for herself. I'm fairly sure I've talked about this before. Carla felt very unworthy starting as a child. Her parents never gave her credit for all of the hard work that she did to make their lives easier. In fact, they gave her a really hard time. And so she found ways to serve in a physical manner, using all of her physical energy that validated her for herself and made her feel purposeful in a way that was objective and undeniable. I think another aspect of this that Ra mentions is that she doesn't see herself as one with the Creator. And I think part of that is her just great, all-encompassing love for Jesus as this other entity, for Jesus as this perfect entity who was so perfect and so full of love that she just saw herself as a mote of dust in comparison to Jesus, right? She looked up to Jesus as this ideal that she could never potentially reach. Whereas if she could have understood that she maybe wasn't actually so different from Jesus, that Jesus wasn't so above her, that they were both humans in an incarnation doing their best, manifesting the love of the Creator through their own individual distortions. Like, you can't be a carbon copy of Jesus, because that's not really serving the Creator to just have the same being over and over again. Right? The Creator wants unique, novel experiences of itself. But because Carla saw Jesus as this other entity above her, and then, this hierarchy then of beings where she was smaller than them, this is what blocked her indigo ray. She didn't feel worthy. She didn't feel as good. She didn't feel good enough as these divinities that she worshipped. So really, if Carla could have worked more to see herself as equal to the Creator, as the Creator, not as a supplicant to the Creator, to a lower portion of the Creator, a supplicant to Jesus, who again she saw as like an individual entity and not a manifestation of the one Creator necessarily, then she could have done a lot of alleviation of this blockage in her indigo ray. I think another interesting point here that Ra mentions is that the indigo ray center receives the intelligent energy from all lawful sources within the one creation that is lawful in this third density distortion or illusion. So I think that's essentially saying that, in third density we do have physical laws. Some of those are a little bit more flexible than others, especially once you do penetrate intelligent infinity. But there are certain physical laws that are restricting us right now. For instance, if your ill health is in the distortion of having a missing limb, even if you unblock your pineal gland, your indigo ray, you're not going to be able to grow a limb back, right? I think this is essentially what Ra is saying, is that you can regain your health in all of the ways that are lawful to this creation. Now, for instance, Carla had portions of her kidneys removed, and they were very distorted. And later on, Ra talks about how she had this psychic surgery to repair them, and it worked. She was able to gain healing back through her faith, through this experience. And Ra says that, a doctor scanning her kidneys would still see the partially formed kidneys and not the whole functional kidney, because she's using her time-space kidneys, essentially, because she accepted that healing of her body. But she wasn't actually able then to grow back her kidneys, but she was able to regain the function of those kidneys as if they were whole again. So there are limitations to how much we can heal, but there are still amazing things that we can do once we gain access to intelligent infinity and wield it for healing. And the first person that we heal with that intelligent infinity is ourselves. At the end here too, Ross says that it's not just the indigo ray that causes distortions, but basically any blockage in any chakra can cause ill health. And because the chakras go in order, red to violet, anywhere that's blocked before the indigo ray can cause health distortions. So really, though, they say that Carla was really only blocked in her indigo ray, but also that made her heart chakra overactive, and that is what also contributed then to her ill health, creating this unworthiness feedback loop, where she then felt the need to prove herself through action, and just such a genuine love of doing that she would give of herself beyond her capacity. And something I think is really interesting is that when you are serving through the heart chakra, you do have that finite sense of self, where you have a limited amount of energy, where you see yourself as just this one little human doing what they can, doing as much as they can, more than what they can even sometimes. But when you have your indigo ray open and you see yourself as the creator, you have more access to the infinite energy of the creator. You aren't necessarily just spending the finite energy of yourself. Now, I still think that there are the laws of the third density creation. Like, you can have your indigo ray open, but that doesn't mean that you never have to sleep again, because you just have infinite, limitless energy and you can just serve without regard to your own physical body. We still have this physical body that we need to tend to and understand the limitations of, and that's wisdom. So that's why the balance of love and wisdom is so important to then getting up through to the indigo ray, where we have more of this awareness and more of an ability to wield infinity through our finite physical bodies. So 12.32, Dawn asks, is it possible for you to tell us if any of the three of us are and have been wanderers? I am Ra. In scanning each of the mind-body-spirit complexes present, we find an already complete assurance of this occurrence and, therefore, find no harm in recapitulating this occurrence. Each of those present are wanderers pursuing a mission, if you will. So here, Don asks this question, and kind of like his question earlier when he was like, hey, who contacted me in 1962? Was that Confederation or Orion? Because they already were pretty sure of the correct answer, Ra could affirm that correct answer. And here Ra is saying that all three of them are wanderers, and they're obviously pursuing a mission, and in the middle of it right now. That's what you're doing. So in 12.33, the last question, Dawn asks, thank you. Is there anything we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? I am Ra. We ask that you realign the object upon which the symbols sit. It is not a significant distortion for one session only, but you will find upon measuring the entire assemblage that the resting place is 1.4 degrees from the correct alignment, the resting place an additional 1/2 degree away from proper orientation. Do not concern yourselves overly with this in the space-time nexus present, but do not allow these distortions to remain over a long period, or the contact will be gradually impaired. I am Ra. I leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. So, in the Book 5 information for this session, Jim says it was finally here at the end of session 12 when they realized that when Ra was talking about the alignments of the objects, that they weren't talking about the physical place of these objects in space-time, that they were actually talking about the alignment of the questions and the questions that Dawn was choosing to ask them. And they're saying, don't overly fixate on this. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just try to do better in the future and try to have that focus towards not asking us questions like, could I have a fight with the Men in Black? Because, I feel like that was probably the most off-topic question Dawn asked in this session. But they finally get it here. In the next session, we'll see Dawn starts out apologizing for asking so many off-topic questions. And again, these questions are focused on trying to prove specific things, and that's what detunes a contact. So Dawn really has to let his desire to have proof of the things, a lot of these things he already knows. At some point later in the future, Ross says, we find it humorous that you ask for confirmation about things that you already know instead of asking questions for things that you don't know. And that's fine with us, but especially if you read Secrets of the UFO, you'll realize that even before the Ra contact, Dawn knew so much, and he's just asking Ra for confirmation about the things that he'd already figured out from other channeling transcripts and from his own research. So finally, they understand what Ra's talking about here at the end of each session about the alignments. So yeah, that was session 12. We We had some interesting things to talk about, more about Orion, and yeah, still a pretty good focus on Orion in this session, but as we move forward, as I'm sure you know if you've read these books before, Dawn starts to focus more on things that aren't so transient and aren't necessarily about the negative polarity. Though I think Ra has a bit of a problem talking about the negative polarity. I think they'd rather questions be framed from the positive angle. I do think that there is a lot of illumination in learning about the negative polarity and how they behave and why they behave the way they do. Because again, I'm somebody who learns what not to do from bad examples. So my mind works really well in that way and saying like, oh, okay, well, that's what Orion does. That's what I shouldn't do. And so I find it pretty useful, but as we go forward, Dawn does try to ask the questions that Ra wants to be asked. They are narrow band, they have a very small window, relatively, of the type of questions that they can be asked before the contact is gradually impaired. And luckily, I don't think that actually ends up happening, because I think Dawn does a good job of really trying to reorient himself going forward. So, yeah, that was session 12. And I appreciate everyone, as always. Thank you so much for listening. I really am enjoying this project. I'm learning a lot by reading these aloud and talking about them and trying to comment on each detail about Ra's responses. So I'm just grateful that my study here will hopefully be useful to others at some point in the future. That's really cool, and that's really fun. So I really appreciate all of you, and I'm grateful that I'm not just shouting into the void. I'm so grateful that there are other people who care about these books and really want to learn about what Ra has to say, because that's my jam. So I will see you all next time with session 13. Thank you, and thank you to the wonderful One Infinite Creator who has given us the opportunity for this shared experience.